Bună seara, vă mulțumim foarte mult că ați reușit să veniți în această seară la un dialog care sper să fie atât constructiv cât și unul care să vă aducă informații noi. De obicei, când vin la astfel de dezbateri sau discuții, tot timpul mă gândesc cu ce se poate deschide o astfel de dialog, cum putem cumva să legăm de viața noastră de zi cu zi. Și din nefericire, viața azi ne-a dat un exemplu foarte, foarte elocvent. Azi a fost breaking news pe BBC, exact acum 2 ore. Tim a fost live acolo și povestea despre o albire fără precedent a coralilor în oceane, mai ales ceva legat de Great Barrier Reef. Exact despre asta ne va povesti și el, să ne explice cât de mare este fenomenul, cât de mult trebuie să ne îngrijoreze și cât de mult ne va atinge pe noi în viața noastră de zi cu zi. Adică avem toate aceste fenomene care par foarte departe de noi și o să ne dăm seama că sunt mult mai aproape decât ne-am aștepta vreodată. Însă înainte să începem să discutăm puțin despre schimbările climatice, despre mediu și lucruri care sper că vă interesează, aș vrea să mulțumesc Asociației SNK faptul că ne găsim în această sală, faptul că avem oportunitatea de a discuta despre acest subiect, faptul că un om ca Tim ar putut să fie în România. Ca și un mic lucru procedural pe care vreau să vă spun, fiecare are câte un carnețel pe scaun. Aceste carnețele au fost făcute după ce au fost tipărite toate cărțile de la SNK. Ce rămâne, toate rămășițele, se fac aceste carnețele ca să nu se piardă absolut nimic. Și asta îmi place foarte mult. Dincolo de acest lucru, Asociația SNK face offsetting, adică plantează, ca fiecare carte pe care ne aduce să poate să aibă un impact pozitiv asupra mediului. Un lucru pe care din ce în ce mai multe companii ar trebui să facă. Dar nu pentru asta am venit ca să îl ascultăm în primul rând pe Tim. Nu știu cei din audiență cum simțiți față de el. Pentru mine e un personaj extrem de important, având în vedere că, așa cum pentru cei din Atena a fost Filipides care a venit cu vestea, știți că au câștigat grecii la maraton, Filipides a alergat din maraton până în Atena, unde să dea vestea și în acest moment, cu câteva mii de ani mai târziu, știm despre acest om. Eu cred că despre Tim nu se știe chiar atât de mult, pentru că el n-a venit cu vestea bună. El ne-a adus o veste proastă și noi, WWF, organizația pe care am onoarea să o reprezint, vorbim în 2016 de câteva fenomene extrem de îngrijorătoare. Avem un raport numit Living Planet Report, care analizează starea de sănătate a planetei, unde, exact ca la bursă, ne uităm la toate efectivele de animale, plante și ne uităm dacă cresc sau dacă scad. Ceea ce vedem în fiecare an, că avem o scădere foarte îngrijorătoare. Din anii 70 până azi, adică în 50 de ani, am pierdut 58% din biodiversitatea totală a planetei. Aceste studii ne-au determinat să declarăm 2 lucruri. Unul, că am intrat în era antropocenului, asta înseamnă că o nouă eră geologică, impactul uman este atât de mare asupra planetei că se va vedea inclusiv în rocile geologice pe viitor. Și a doua, dacă nu suntem atenți foarte în curând, vom putea să spunem că ajungem la a 6-a extincție în masă. Noutatea sau ceea ce vreau să subliniez aici, că noi spunem toate aceste lucruri în 2016. Dacă luați în mână cartea lui Tim din 2005, el descrie toate aceste lucruri cu 10 ani înainte să vorbească oricine despre acest fenomen. Cartea nu degeaba a ajuns pe primul loc la bestseller list la New York Times. A ajuns pentru că a adus niște elemente noi despre care nimeni nu știa. Și acum discutăm deja de 10 ani despre acest fenomen. Am văzut că am ajuns la Paris la un acord istoric. La Copenhaga, Tim a avut onoarea să prezideze Consiliul Climatic și el a condus partea tehnică a tuturor discuțiilor. Acum, întrebarea la care a venit Tim să ne răspundă, și asta face prin 2 moduri. În primul rând ne face această prezentare, dar în al doilea rând, la 10 ani distanță, a scris o carte nouă, în care analizează unde s-a dus fenomenul schimbărilor climatice, în același timp ne spune ce am putea să facem cumva să reducem acest impact. Și acum, dincolo de ce a scris în aceste cărți, că amândouă cărți, din punctul meu de vedere, sunt fantastice și lucrez în domeniu, n-am cum să nu fiu puțin entuziasmat când citesc cărțile lui, dar sper că și voi veți citi și veți vedea, ne va încerca să arate toate aceste informații, să comprime cumva într-o prezentare mai scurtă, ca să prindem gustul subiectului și apoi să putem să ducem un dialog mai departe. Tim.
Thank you very much for that great introduction, and thank you all for being here this evening. Could I extend a very special thanks to Seneca Books, who brought me here to Romania and have shown me so much of the country and have expanded my understanding hugely. So this is a very special time for me, really, to come to a new country and learn as much as I'm learning. But I'm also trying to explain things as well as I go and to give information about climate change. I do believe that we have come to a point, a moment, in terms of our climate change challenge where the responsibility where we all bear individually and that we bear as parts of companies or corporations or governments or whatever else is becoming quite critical. This is an issue that affects everything and everyone. Just, is this going to work for me? I am hitting the right, oh, there we go, wrong button, sorry. The message of climate change is not just a recent one. As long ago as 1859, this man here, John Tyndall, made a fundamental discovery. He used infrared radiation, this big machine here, to discover that carbon dioxide traps heat energy. And that was really the beginning of a big journey for humanity. We finally understood why our planet wasn't just a frozen snowball. You know, we are so far from the sun that Earth should be just a frozen snowball, but the discovery that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps heat and warms the planet explained why that wasn't so. We've come a very long way since 1859, and today climate science is based on extremely sophisticated computer modelling as well as real-world data collection, which is instantaneous from satellites, from deep-sea probes, from soil moisture probes, from thousands of instruments around our planet. And what we have learnt is that humans are having a big impact on planet Earth. This, I wonder where the pointer is on this. I'm very sorry. I think, yeah, it's dead in the middle. Okay. So what the computer programs are telling us is that, that the climate is changing as a result of human activity. So these graphs here represent the climate of various areas of the Earth, this being Europe, for the 20th century. And what we see here in the purple band is computer modelling which takes out the human factors, so purely the natural factors, sunspot activity and so forth. The red band, however, is computer modelling with the human activities included, so the greenhouse gases that we produce as industrial societies. The black line in the middle is the real-world data. That was what the temperature actually did over the 20th century. And you can see in every case, the real-world data is consistent only with the computer modelling that includes the human-caused greenhouse gases. So this is very strong proof that people are influencing the climate of our Earth. Really, scientifically, this is indisputable now. There is no serious debate about this. Just early this year, even more advances in understanding have been made. This Anthropocene equation was published in February of this year, and it describes in a very simple mathematical form the factors that influence the Earth system, including the Earth climate. And you can see here A, G and I. This is astronomical forces, geophysical forces, internal dynamics, and E is the Earth system. So for 4 billion years, these factors have completely controlled the conditions at the surface of our planet. But in the last 40 years, one huge additional factor has come into play, and that is the human influence. And what we are now seeing is that this factor is driving our climate at a speed 170 times faster than all of the natural forces put together. So we really are now entering a phase of Earth's history where humans are controlling the major processes, including the climate of the planet. So how are we exerting that influence? This artist, Steve Halley, has produced a number of artworks like this, which help explain how we are exerting that influence. These are the individual barrels of oil that we extract from Earth's crust every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day of the year. So you can see this is a vast volume. When we add to that the coal, the natural gas that we pull out, and all of the carbon that is contained within that, putting into a very finite atmosphere, you can understand how that influence works. And our atmosphere looks very big, but in fact it is quite small. The atmosphere is 1/500th the size of the oceans. So it's a very small and dynamic organ of our planet. And as we pour these vast volumes of gas into it, we change its composition in ways that influence the whole Earth system. So where are we using these fossil fuels? Of course, they are being used across the economy, in transport, in industry, in energy generation, in AFLOU, that's agriculture and forestry, are the sources. The total volume of CO2 that we're putting into the air every year now is on the order of 49 gigatons. It's an inconceivably large number, but to get a sense of how big it is, we can say if we wanted to put that same volume of gas into the air, we would need to vaporize every human being on this planet twice over every year to make the equivalent volume of gas going into the planet. That's 7.4 billion people we would have to vaporize and put into the atmosphere twice over to make up that volume. These are very, very large figures. Which countries are putting out most of the pollution, the carbon pollution? Here we see China is clearly the leader. It's not very fair to blame China for this, however, because China makes almost everything that we use. I know you have factories here in Romania making things, which is great, but a lot of the manufacturing goes on in China. This is probably made in China, yeah? Maybe this is made, everything's made in China. So we all share the guilt for that. The United States, another big emitter, and then we have Russia, India, and then a series of smaller emitters. Australia is right down here. And Romania is so small it's not even on the graph. I often hear the argument in Australia that, well, we're just a rounding error in this great stream of pollution, maybe 1%. Why should we bother doing anything? Well, the trouble is, most of the 193 countries that are part of this process are all rounding errors. They all need individually to do something, otherwise nothing will be done. Good. So what now are the impacts? And I'll just very briefly go over some of the impacts of this stream of pollution into the atmosphere. Scientists have asked which ecosystems are affected by climate change. The truth is that climate change impacts have now been documented across every ecosystem on Earth. All of them are registering changes. I want to just go through a few extreme cases here, which are very sad for me personally. Coral reefs of the world are in very bad shape. An article, the headline article in the Guardian newspaper today was Australia's most respected coral reef scientist saying that the Great Barrier Reef in Australia has now entered its terminal phase. So we are talking about the largest living organism on our planet, Australia's Great Barrier Reef. It produces $5.6 billion of tourism income. It has a massive fishery that it supports. It also acts as the barrier that protects our coastline from marine erosion. The cost of that alone is probably in the billions of dollars. And now we read today that this great structure is in its terminal decline. For me, I can read it, but I can't quite comprehend it. I've been diving on the Barrier Reef since I was 17 years old. I saw it before the first bleaching event ever happened, and it was a paradise. This year, we've seen 2 years in a row of coral bleaching, which have been catastrophic. And industry is not entirely innocent here. This, again, on the same day that we read that the Great Barrier Reef is in its terminal decline, this article appeared in The Guardian. Here is a large coal loading facility to send coal around the world for export. We had a Cyclone Debbie, come through. This is one of the region's most valuable wetlands. 40,000 bird species, migratory bird species, use this wetland. So here is before the cyclone, here is after the cyclone. Vast amounts of coal blown and washed into this valuable wetland, utterly destroying it. And coal that will also reach the Barrier Reef in time. So not only do we have the bleaching and the warm water and the pesticides and herbicides, we also have this direct physical destruction by the coal export industry having an impact. And our politics are so difficult in Australia that on the day that all of this is happening, our Prime Minister is travelling to India to try to sell more coal. So if you think you have difficult politics here in Romania, you're not alone, but we need to keep fighting on. I spent most of my early life as a biologist in Papua New Guinea, and I climbed almost all of the high mountains in that country and discovered many amazing kinds of animals. These two creatures here are kangaroos. I guess you all know about kangaroos, but these are a special kind of kangaroos called tree kangaroos. They live in the treetops of the tropical forests. This one here was only discovered in 1995. It's a really beautiful animal that lives on the alpine summits of the mountains above the tree line. I discovered and named this animal. It was really the highlight of my life as a biologist. It looks like a little panda, very, very beautiful. And this animal here lives on a lower mountain range. And again, it's an extraordinary creature. It has the largest brain relative to its body weight of any marsupial. So we call it the Rhodes Scholar of the kangaroo family. Quite a smart animal. But the sad truth is that both of these animals are doomed for extinction at the current rate at which we're polluting our atmosphere. Because in New Guinea, for every 1 degree C of temperature rise, the tree line rises 300 metres. So there's just nowhere for these animals to go. None of the mountains are tall enough to provide a refuge for such creatures by the end of the century, if we continue as we are. And these are just one charismatic species in the habitat. The habitat that supports this animal has 600 endemic rhododendron species found nowhere else. Birds of paradise found nowhere else. And this is one island that most of you probably don't think very much about, in a world full of mountains and islands, all of which will suffer as the planet warms. Our fish are also being affected. This is just an average group of fish come out of the North Sea, the sort of things you're likely to eat here if you order a fish meal any day of the week. They're being affected by climate change. Haddock, whiting, herring, a whole series of species have been monitored over a 40-year period. Over that time, the water temperature in the North Sea has increased 1 to 2 degrees. The fish have decreased in size, they've shrunk to the extent that yields in fishing have declined 23%. So you can see there how our climate impacts, how warming the planet is affecting fisheries. And this is by no means unusual. As the Great Barrier Reef dies, the large fish, the gropers and other big fish wash up dead on the beach because the water is so hot they can't get enough oxygen to survive. If you don't care about fish, maybe you're a vegetarian, maybe you have a glass of wine occasionally and would enjoy doing that into the future. Australia has a great wine industry, but it's being badly affected by climate change. Over the last couple of years, the sun has become so strong that Australian wine growers have had to invent a sunscreen for grapes. Can you believe that? Like we put sunscreen on our skin, they put it on their grapes. And we're having problems with smoke taint. More and more bushfires coming every year. Grapes tainted by smoke have to be thrown away, so we lose our harvest. And a lot of the grape varieties are just no longer coping with the hot conditions. So lots and lots of impacts. In fact, these scenes from Australia probably in a decade or two will be a thing of the past as we continue warming our planet. Just basic food security is another issue. You'll often hear climate skeptics say, CO2 is great for plants, they grow really fast. And that's very true, they do. But they're much less nutritious because they grow fast, have more carbon, but much less minerals, much less protein in their structure. So the Chinese are so worried about this that they are really striving to address climate change now because they see that with their heavy dependence on rice and wheat, they will be facing a food security crisis by 2050 if nothing is done. I want to get on beyond impacts now. There are many impacts we could talk about. Melting glaciers, rising sea levels, epidemic diseases and so forth, but we don't have time. I want to go on to the politics and to say thank heavens we brokered a global agreement to deal with this problem in Paris in December 2015, and that we shouldn't see that as a solution. That is simply the beginning, because we have to honour that agreement now in coming years. One way of looking at how long we've got to honour that agreement is a thing called the carbon budget. And I'm sorry to put up a complex slide, but we're getting into the technical bit of the talk now, and please bear with me for a few minutes while I run through it. We saw the fossil fuels in an earlier slide coming out of geological reservoirs, being burnt, put into the atmosphere. That is part of our carbon budget. We know that we destroy forests, we destroy soils, and that puts more carbon into the atmosphere. But it is a part of the Earth system that, in fact, carbon goes back in and is absorbed by our oceans and absorbed by the land. So only a fraction of the carbon that goes up stays there. That is this fraction here. Around about half of the carbon we put up stays in the atmosphere. So at that rate of accumulation, we can say, how long will it be before we say commit ourselves to 2 degrees of warming, which is a very, very dangerous level of warming. We're currently at about 1 degree. The IPCC estimates about 20 years, but there is some good emerging science to say that it is much less than 20 years. Again, I just want to go through in a little bit of detail some of this. One thing that the IPCC does when they look at the carbon budget is to say, well, these sinks here, they're stable, they don't change over time. So every year we get 2.6 gigatons of carbon going into the ocean, every year 3.1 gigatons into the land. New research has shown that that just isn't true. In fact, as the planet warms, those carbon sinks weaken and get less able to take in carbon from the air. So imagine we have a certain number of gigatons of carbon in our budget, but we've got to take out about 125 here for the weakening sinks. We also have to take out 45 because of the thawing of the permafrost in Siberia and similar places. The Amazon forest is already dying because of drought and extreme heat. We must account for the carbon that goes into the atmosphere from that. The forests in the north of Russia and in Canada are dying as pine bark beetles attack them, so we have to account for that carbon as well. And the bacteria in the ocean are respiring faster, releasing more carbon as the ocean warms, so we must add that. So as we look at our carbon budget, we might say, well, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, told us we had $100 in the bank, to draw an analogy. So we had 20 years to act, that all seems fine. But when you add this up, it's like going to the bank and saying, I want to see my bank account, and they say, oh, look, sorry, we had some fees and some charges and other costs, so really you've only got $50 left in your bank account. Sort of a bit like that. But it gets worse, because CO2 isn't the only greenhouse gas. Methane and nitrous oxide are also powerful greenhouse gases, accounting for 11% and 6% of the warming. But the IPCC didn't include them in the budget because the warming impact is offset by particles in the atmosphere that cool our planet. But those particles are really dangerous to human health. And China and India are really trying to reduce that particulate pollution. And the greenhouse gases, these last for decades in the atmosphere. These particles last for just a few weeks. So as the air is cleaned up, we will see more warming being put in. So how big is our bank account at the end of all of that? It turns out that the recent science says that in fact we don't have any money left in the bank account. What we have instead is a debt. We have a small debt to be paid back, a debt that grows every year. So we are already committed to 2 degrees of warming, which is very bad news if we just rely on emissions reduction. We have to find new tools, and this is the negative emissions technologies that I've been working on for some years with others to try to develop. And we will now have a quick look at those carbon negative technologies. You might recognise this man here. He's an extraordinary individual called Sir Richard Branson, a real entrepreneur and businessman. In 2007, he called me to his headquarters, his Virgin Islands place, where he had all of the CEOs of his businesses gathered together and asked me to talk to them about climate change. After I gave the talk, he said, I don't think we're going to address this issue in time. I think people will just be a bit too lazy. I said, oh yeah, so what do you want to do? And he said, I'd like to put up a prize, £25 million prize, for anyone who can demonstrate a technology that will take 1 gigaton of carbon out of the atmosphere. I never thought we'd need to do that, but I humoured him, I suppose. I said, yes, Richard, well, that's a great idea. I think we're going to have really big breakthrough at Copenhagen, you know. But, of course, I was proved wrong. But he put the prize up anyway, and I was one of the judges, along with this man here. We have now had 11,000 entries to that prize. Huge range of technologies and possibilities, which I'll talk about through the next few slides. It turns out there are 2 ways of drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, biological and chemical. Am I pointing this out? There we go, so up. You can do it. Oh, hold on, we've gone way too far. Sorry. Can we go back? Does anyone else have any control? No, going the wrong way again. Well, we'll stick with what we've got. I'm sorry, the biological pathways, I'll try to come back to them, but let's have a look at the chemical pathways. They are pathways that are quite relevant to industry. We have one possibility of drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere using carbonate silicate rocks, and these are rocks which, as they weather, absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. This really is probably Earth's most important mechanism for regulating CO2. We can take these rocks and grind them up and expose them to the air, and they'll weather and take CO2 in. We also have things like carbon negative concretes. We can build buildings now using concretes which absorb CO2 out of the atmosphere and store them in the building structure, rather than polluting with CO2 as we build. And we can even use direct air capture of CO2. And some of these machines are extremely efficient. They can capture as much CO2 as 1,000 hectares of forest, and we can then use that CO2 for various purposes. Thank you very much, whoever is controlling the machine here. I would just go back to biological capture. I went, mamma mia, come on. Here we go. This is it, got it. Sorry, I'm very difficult. Okay, so one way we all know about capturing CO2 is by growing trees. Yeah, because a tree grows from CO2 captured out of the air, and you look at a tree, you can tell how much CO2 it's captured during its life, in round figures. But you've got to think of the roots as well, yeah? So a very good way of capturing CO2. And the energy's free. I mean, the sunlight powers the whole system, the tree does its job, and wow, great mechanism. We can also use soil carbon to do the same thing. The humus, the black part of the soil, and charcoal in the soil stores carbon at a very large scale, at a scale, in fact, globally about twice to 3 times as large as the living forest and living plants. So very, very good thing to do. We can also use seaweed. Seaweed is a fantastic thing. It grows very fast, it captures lots of carbon, and is an increasing option for farming. We've already had a look at these ones. We'll go past those. So the big problem we face is scale. I talked about 49 gigatons of CO2 going up every year. So let's imagine we want to draw down 1/10 of that amount, 5 gigatons, by planting trees, because we can all visualize that, yeah? So how many trees would we need to plant to draw down 1/10 of current emissions of CO2? It turns out you would need to cover the continent of North America in forest to do that over a 50-year period, and then you would average 5 gigatons. Very, very large scale. So when we talk about tree planting and protecting forests and soil carbon, these are all very, very good things to be doing, but they won't solve the problem by themselves. We need other tools as well. I'll go past this. Is Mr. Alan Savory, who discovered how to store carbon on very large scale by doing basically what your shepherds do here in Romania, moving the livestock around the countryside in ways that are very efficient in terms of giving perennial plants a chance to survive. But I will talk a little bit about kelp farming. Kelp is fantastic stuff. It grows at 30 to 60 times the rate of land-based plants. It is a very valuable feedstock for many industrial processes, alginates and so forth. All of the omega-3 fatty acids that we like to eat when we have our salmon and so forth originally come from this plant. It's a very valuable feedstock in aquaculture as well, and at the moment something like 12 million tonnes a year of seaweed are grown. It's quite a big industry and growing very, very quickly. But we need to store that carbon somewhere if we grow the industry. This is the Pacific Ocean. It's a very big place. You could have a lot of seaweed farms out there. How many would we need to have an impact on our climate? A study completed a few years ago said if we covered 9% of the ocean in seaweed farms, we could draw down all of the CO2 we put up in any one year, as well as produce enough high-quality protein to feed a human population 200 kilograms of fish and shellfish a year for a population of 10 billion people. Now that is scale. That is really scale in terms of this issue. The trouble is we don't have a single ocean-going seaweed farm today. This is an industry we're going to have to build from scratch. And we have to care for the animals, even in the deep sea. There's a whole ecosystem down there. We may not see it, but it's important to our planet. So as we go about developing seaweed farms, we need to do the due diligence, the research that will show that we're not going to be damaging the deep ocean. Another possibility is using energy to cool the air over the Antarctic. This might sound like science fiction, and in fact it comes out of astrobiology. The scientists who thought about this said, you know, if you look at Mars, you can see that the ice caps are made of solid CO2. So why don't we have solid CO2 ice caps on Earth? It turns out that the air doesn't get cold enough often enough over the Antarctic to make that happen. Sometimes at the Vostok station, the air drops to 90 degrees, minus 90 degrees C, and then the CO2 falls out of the air as snow. But when the place warms up again, it just sublimates and goes into the atmosphere. But if you could install wind turbines there, about half as many as Germany has today, for example, and use them to run big chiller boxes to chill the air a few tens of degrees, you could be capturing a gigaton of carbon dioxide a year out of the atmosphere and storing it in the ice of the ice cap. Not something we can do today, but maybe by 2050 it's something we'll need to start thinking about as the damage from climate change really starts to accelerate. Carbon negative concretes and building blocks I already mentioned. They are available on the market today. Building blocks are really simple. You can put seaweed in building blocks like that or some other form of carbon. The ones produced in the UK are minus 14 kilograms of carbon per tonne instead of being plus many, many kilograms. So these things exist already. Why aren't we using them at greater scale? Where is our government in terms of regulating or incentivising industries to use more sustainable products? I mentioned silicate rocks. That's what they look like there. We can make beaches out of them, playgrounds, whatever we want. And they are really a scalable solution. A recent study by one of our most prominent climate scientists, a study published last year, said we could even be taking 30 to 300 parts per million of CO2 out of the atmosphere by 2100 using these rocks. So, and that, there's only 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere today, so this is really big scale. But how will we incentivise people to start using these rocks instead of sand or other rocks? Direct air capture, I mentioned. Fantastic new industries building in this area. You can see here plastics made from atmospheric CO2. I've held a little mobile phone cover in my hand made of atmospheric CO2, a plastic phone cover made originally from CO2. It was astronomically expensive, probably the most expensive phone cover in the universe, but it can be done. This stuff exists, and we need to start bringing it to scale. One of the most exciting developments recently by this man here, Professor Licht, who has worked out how to make carbon fibre directly from atmospheric CO2 at a competitive cost to current industrial processes. Really, really interesting development, huh? If you're a car manufacturer or you're doing anything with aluminium and steel, because this stuff is the lightest, strongest stuff we know about. And to be able to produce it cheaply and using atmospheric CO2 to do it is a big breakthrough. There's also synthetic pathways for fixing photosynthetic pathways. I won't bother you with these, but there's another whole possible industry here. I just want to say to you before I go on that when I gave this presentation last week at the American School here in Bucharest, the young kids in the audience were really engaged, and you have excellent educational institutions here, very, very bright students. Some came up to me afterwards saying, I want to be an entrepreneur. How can I start doing this? How can I get into this? Others said, I want to be an engineer. Which area should I be studying? The enthusiasm is fantastic. But we, as the adults who make the rules now, we have to create the opportunities for those people. The people in government need to make sure that those kids get the chance to do this. And if you're in industry, do you want to attract just the average kind of kid, or do you want the best and brightest? Because if you want the best and brightest, you've got to offer them something exciting. Offer them something they can do with their lives that will make a difference to the world that they will inherit. So these technologies and these approaches and sustainability as a whole is really, really important. When I give this presentation to older people, they often say, oh, this all sounds like science fiction. We're not going to get any of this done in my lifetime. The world doesn't change that fast. Well, I just want you to think back at another period of change, that between 1917 and 1950, because we're talking about 2017 to 2050, yeah, when we'll really need these industries. Well, that's what London was like in 1917. Horse-drawn transport everywhere, people going to fight in a great war. And when they were at school, this was the sort of map they studied. Can you believe it? A map defined by the British Empire in this case, yeah? And this looked timeless. No one ever thought this was going to change. Do you notice there's not a single communist country on that map? And there wouldn't have been at this time in 1917. That was a world that was fossilised and never would, and no one could imagine it changing. And this is Geneva in 1950. So if you'd taken a European from 1917 with that worldview and say, this is going to be the world in 33 years' time, look at all the motor vehicles on the streets. Think about what was in the air in 1950. So you're telling someone in 1917, there's going to be jet aircraft. There's going to be electrification in the home. There's going to be nuclear weapons. What would they have told you? They would have said, you're dreaming. That's just sci-fi. That's science fiction. That's not going to happen. But in fact, it did. And the one reality we know about this century as compared with last is that the rate of technological and social change is even greater than it was last century. So while 33 years might seem like a small time, I am completely convinced that we will see an economic and technological revolution in this area to address climate change, because I know that we must. People don't want to live in a world without a Great Barrier Reef, or without the biodiversity we have today, or the food security we have today. People want that changed, and that's why these new industries will have to take root and grow in the next 33 years. Thank you very much.